So now it's my pleasure to introduce Darwin Peterson, Tools, Processes, and Governance Manufacturing Engineer at Spirit AeroSystems. He'll take us through knowledge representation for automated process planning. All right, welcome, Darwin.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. So we're going to talk, as she said, about knowledge representation for automated process planning. I'll take just a few minutes and give you a brief overview of Spirit AeroSystems. These, by way of explanation as well, there isn't a lot of time in this presentation, and this topic is really actually a very large one. In addition to the fact that I was not allowed to share specific details at this point. So what I'm going to do is really just address a lot of major elements in the space. The pictures that you will see are primarily stock company photos, but they help give you a little bit of a view of the kind of work that we're doing. The top photo here on the right is actually the composite layup of the entire forward fuselage of a 787, and some subassembly work in Malaysia is the next slide. So general concepts. And let me see if I can zoom up, because screen size is a bit of an issue for some. Let's try this. Let's see if that helps. This gives you a little bit of an idea of the work we do. That in blue is a general area of work. This slide is a bit outdated in terms of backlog after COVID, and the grounding of the 737 MAX has done quite the damage on the commercial aerospace business. So I'll let you look at that for a moment. You see that the 737, we build the entire fuselage, and we were right just about to go to 47 of those a month when the grounding of the MAX took place. So timing was particularly difficult for us. We also do quite a bit of defense work, and that's an increasing aspect of our work. We are a global company with sites in Kansas, Oklahoma, North Carolina, Malaysia, the UK, and France, with more than 50% of our work in fuselage, but also propulsion and wing. And that little picture of the white fuselages, those are 787 in final assembly in that little picture. Okay, let's talk about this project and some background here. I've been working here at Spirit, or before that was Boeing. It was Boeing when I hired in here 32 years ago. And 2006 sold us off as an independent company, which is now Spirit AeroSystems. I've spent most of my career on information architectures, knowledge acquisition, and knowledge representation in support of generative process planning or similar things, primarily to do with details or small subassemblies. We learned about AROS and the knowledge aware concept over 3 years ago with a similar project to what we're working now, but it was more general. And it was intended to be some generative process planning for assembly. We had hoped to be able to start small, and when we first looked at AROS, we were very interested, and we spent hours talking with several team members from GM, which was very helpful. Thank you, folks from GM. And then in 2018, I attended this conference, and in 2019, we started our SEED project. But I have to explain that the SEED project is really probably not legitimately a SEED project, because it's far larger than you would typically call a SEED project. And so what happened was there was a new production line was being created, and our team was directed to focus all of our energy in support of that. So we weren't able to have a smaller, more focused SEED project. It was a full-blown project from the ground up, creating a whole new assembly line. So there were a lot of moving pieces and things going on all at the same time. So it's very complex. It is focused on assemblies from 3D CAD and other engineering requirements data. So it's way beyond just the knowledge for the process planning part, but from an AROS and a knowledge representation perspective at this point, it's focused on that, the support for the process planning. It's slated to go into production first quarter next year. I say prototype because there's still lots of development to be done, including incorporation into the enterprise architecture level. It is very geometry intensive for some obvious reasons and some maybe not so obvious that I'll try to address a little bit later. All of it would be greatly benefited by more industry standardization in product definition and process definition as well. And the output of these tools and process is going to be consumed by machines and people. So context a little bit. Many years ago, when it was still Boeing, I had an assignment with quite a number of people to participate in these long, tedious, all-day reviews of over 600 software systems to try to get them reduced. Many of these have been created at local sites, and so there was a lot of personal ownership in those. Many of them were duplicates, so you can imagine it was a pretty long, intense days. And one particular afternoon, after a long day, one man in the back of the room, who is now an executive at Microsoft, just exploded in frustration and shouted very loud, "Stop, stop." And everyone looked at him and he said, "Look, this conversation is completely out of context." And then he began to explain some things that the rest of them didn't know. I recalled that interesting experience many times, and anybody that's been involved in knowledge management and representation very long quickly learns that context can change everything. It can change your form and the content itself, not even just the form. So helping people to understand the appropriate context, and in this context we're talking about processes. You can have a technically correct rule that can be functionally unusable when represented without accurate or complete understanding of the appropriate process context. So process complexity, therefore, adds to the challenges of functional representation. Process planning is really where this major point of integration between the product and the process execution takes place. A lot of people readily understand the difference conceptually, but there become a lot of challenges very quickly when people try to engage in this discipline in detail. There are things like, where do I draw the line between evaluation and interrogation, which also affects and is affected by your process context. How frequently is something going to happen? Where in the process is this connection to your knowledge going to happen? And so is it something you store, or you just retrieve and calculate or determine from a rules engine at that appropriate point in time? There's also a significant need to understand and describe the universe of product definition. Many times you don't know what you don't know. There's also significant challenges in representing product attributes and requirements for process planning. I heard this come up multiple times yesterday because it's just part of the turf. Is there is no precise right or wrong in most cases. There's always a continuing challenge to balance the theoretical and the practical, the science and the art. There's a temptation, for example, to define products in terms of processes. And again, maybe purely theoretical becomes impractical, but trying to distinguish product from process without perverting the two of them and creating unnecessary confusion is something to be aware of. I also think it's impossible to overstate the importance of a foundation in parameter management. It forces the team to communicate clearly in defining rules. People are very quick to informally, in conversational language, state a rule. Those are highly unreliable. Lots of conflicts, lots of assumptions. And when you begin to be precise, it's kind of like the light goes on for many people and they go, okay. And then they have to start over and rethinking it and realize there's things they completely missed. Because you're integrating product with process, product is pretty stable in general. Our business has an extremely long product life. We're flying military airplanes that were made long before I was born and still in service. So things have to be flexible. Processes change. We create new processes. The language and representation between the process and the product, and therefore knowledge relating to it, can be completely new very easily. So you need something to manage this exponential increase in objects, relationships, and attributes, and be able to modify them quickly without disrupting your foundational data and data structures. What we're doing presently with this project is we're using a Neo4j graph database for that kind of content. So by definition, process planning is a sequenced set of activities. They typically have standards in them, so they repeat frequently. Value tables are not really conducive to this. That's not really what they were designed for. We're using them for that because there's APIs to them at present. So the current method is sequentially named parameters. It's a bit difficult to manage, and if the process gets very large, then it's not really feasible in a long process scenario, but that's what we're doing at the moment. So to go further, processes can have processes inside them, so they become a hierarchy, and that invites situations where there's logical looping taking place. You can also have, and typically do, have a need for sorting and sequencing at each of those levels after you've determined content at each of the level. Then there's rules about that. This also interjects the contextual logic issue much more specifically, like, is process B required in this context? Is step 2 inside process B required, or if so, at what frequency? How many of them? And then once that content is generated, putting sequencing or sorting on top of it. And to go a little further, if that's a little too small, let me talk some of this up again at time. I'll try to zoom this up, but I'm going to probably run out of time if I don't keep moving here. At the moment, I've created what I'm calling logic maps, something like this. What you see here is essentially a redacted, simplified, literally from our current project, follows something like this. This is content to help communicate to the programmers when and how to access knowledge that has been represented, but the interactions and the timing and the repeat kinds of things are all handled within the program code. So at a simplest level, a simple single input output, right? That's a K-pack. You put it in a set, you get it from the rules engine, from the API, that's great. You can do the same with multiple K-packs in the set, and functionally it behaves pretty much the same. However, all of those are pretty much contextually ignorant in terms of where are they in the process. They don't know where they've been, they don't know where they're going. So in this case, then, as an example, object type A for 1 through N needs to be evaluated through set 2, which will return a pass or fail for each one of those. A similar thing in set 2 with a pass or fail, and then in set 4, an evaluation of all of that data to get a total pass or fail for A from groups A1 and A2. So those are very common kinds of knowledge and structure that needs to be represented. So at this point, we've managed the set pieces as far as what's accessed by the program. The rest of the logic, I'm communicating to them otherwise at the moment. Another important aspect, and for us, in some businesses, manufacturing, the work instructions per se are not that important. In our business, a regulatory business, the work instructions are extremely important. A lot of people think they understand our industry and complexity in work instructions, and a lot of people think they've got solutions and have tried to propose them. I've spent my whole life in this space, and I have to say honestly that most of them at best are temporary, and some of them actually make things much worse. They're not maintainable. And primarily it's because they don't understand the kind of things that I have on this one slide. You have standard work, you have specific location, you have specific product. You may or may not have specific processing parameters that need to be consumed by humans, by machines. You may or may not have data collection. You have cycle times to produce. And you want at least particularly things that have to do with standard work to be created as near real time as possible, because those things frequently change. So what we did in this project, we created a K-pack type as a template. There's more than 90 of these just for this small project that are this standard work. And there's a rule contained in here. There is a cycle time calculation or delivery. There's a minimal work instruction, a larger set of work instruction as needed, and other related parameter content that you can't see small here, all that's structured. And these K-packs are accessed both at the authoring phase and what I would call kind of a pre-process phase that takes the initial data we created, delivered from the order to the line system, and we do last-minute processing to actually create the final work instructions. And so these will get used at both of those states. So, some further development suggestions. Again, these are some high-level groupings, but anybody who's been involved in this very long, you've probably already thought this, listening to what I've said so far. APIs for method K-packs seem like a logical solution for a significant number of the things that I've briefly demonstrated. Standard patterns, sequencing a set of activities, the sequence context for rules about the activities, as I mentioned a few minutes ago about in that particular context, what is the rule for something? When do we need it? The logical looping and hierarchy issues, and the higher logical map level of rules and relationships. I think all of those can be facilitated with that. So we are having conversations, and when we get some of the pressure of this project off our back, we hope to work with AROS on that as well. Array processing in general, I think, has some significant potential. Value tables are designed for a single set of inputs to in and out. something even like a grouping and sorting rules that might be stored in Excel, where we produce a set of content and then it needs to just follow a set of rules to be sorted and grouped. Or even to evaluate an array from a logical perspective. You could argue that that's a neural network, and that's a huge conversation all its own. But I think we have cases for evaluating an array itself logically. And the general recommendation, I think, from ours about value tables is to reduce the internal logic inside it and creating all the permutations or rows. There's really no right or wrong way. It's really just depends on what you're trying to optimize and who's working with it. When the data set is large, I personally prefer not having all the rows and having rules in there, logic rules, which I think are more explicit to communicate what is really intended rather than trying to derive it from, hundreds or 1,000 rows of data. So another suggestion that we have is to include regex in the toolkit supporting logical expressions. So in conclusion, process planning, it's got a lot of interesting and challenging knowledge representation in the domain. A large percent of this is typically accomplished in application code. Our goal is to support the COPs and reduce the programming costs by continuing to increase the domain of process planning in the knowledge representation. So anything we can do to accomplish that will allow the program to be more generic and require a lot less maintenance. And so there's lots and lots of opportunity with some further development, and of course it can be generalized to any domain. Processes happen everywhere. The picture is two 787 fuselages loading into the back of Boeing's airplane called a Dreamlifter. This is a 747 that's had the whole top cut off at the floor beams and a new upper fuselage put on that's much larger. And then they fly these to Everett, Washington, and South Carolina from here in Wichita. They have a dual assembly line, so back and forth between those two places. So anybody interested in further information or collaboration can contact me directly. We're going to be working on this as long as I'm working here. So questions?
Yeah, thanks so much, Darwin. We do have a couple of questions. So let's start with a question from Bill. For the work instructions, do you compose the step-by-step instructions inside Oros, or is there another document where annotations are added and the image is copied into the KPAC?
Great question. Let me go back and I'll try to illustrate. How's this? So what I was trying to illustrate here on this slide, work instructions, and I think this is one thing the industry has really struggled with because you can't go find anything off the shelf to do this, is an intelligent way to integrate what is standard and what is unique. So that process of your specific question, integrating the product specific with the process general that's going to happen. What these KPACs do here is indicate, and you can't see all the details of it, but they indicate all of those elements that are required for this process. What geometries would be standard geometry views that would be delivered, and this identifies that. So in the authoring process, it would know that this process is required, and that process requires this view. Those views are created, and then when the final instruction is put together, it assembles that content from this instruction.
Very good. Yeah. Now, two people have the very same question. What are the key factors you considered in selecting Oros as a tool to manage the process planning?
we were looking for a place to represent knowledge. I've been at this for 30 years. I hadn't seen anybody who really had anything viable but this. It's not a programming language, so one of the issues when you get deep into this realm is blurring the lines or getting, where do you draw the line between what you can formally represent in knowledge this way as opposed to what's represented directly in code. You can get into some modeling languages and so forth. So those are some interesting opportunities for further discussion. But we chose AeroS because, frankly, I didn't see anything else out there that was like it, that was offering it. They're really, primarily, the only other kinds of options that you see were things that we had already done previously and most everybody else had done that was in this space is just simple lookup tables. So they had some kind of database in the background, just doing simple query and lookup. And from the simplest value table perspective, that's what those are, right? But the ability to do them with logic inside them is one of the beauties of the KPAC and the value table.
Ryan is wondering, are you using assessment controls with the KPACs you've created in AeroS?
Good question. At present, no, we are not. In fact, we haven't quite actually stood up our production instance. That's going to happen very soon. And right now, I am the guy. I'm doing all the work in there. But I'm ready to put all that responsibility off on the shoulders of a set of SMEs that are going to own this content. So right now, we aren't doing that. And as far as this domain is concerned, at least get a production line, the intent is not to use them, but to do a similar kind of thing from a minimal content perspective and retain, for example, when the application interface is AeroS, keep track of what KPACs were used and what version. So similar kinds of retain it on our database side rather than AeroS, but we have plans and ideas for other places where certainly we will use that, but this is where we're just starting out.
And just a quick reminder to mute, please. I think we might have one or two unmuted. If you just hover over where you see your name in the upper right, you can click the 3 tabs and, a mute button will show, and just click mute. Thanks so much, because we get a little bit of feedback. From Mauro, interesting, you see the need for arrays on value tables. Why is that?
Well, it's a long question and difficult to answer here. Simply stated, you're essentially having to evaluate multiple things together simultaneously. So it's not as simple as a particular object. It's about multiple objects and relationships of objects. So there's situations where evaluation of an array seems like something that would be beneficial. So we're working around it with other mechanisms at the moment.
Yeah, and no, I don't have the ability to mute individually to answer that question, but so let's see, any other questions? I've covered that. Okay, Jimmy does say, thanks for sharing your experience. How does Spirit AeroSystems set the context for their processes? Is there a specific area of the technology that you found particularly useful?
Well, we have not had an opportunity at this point to exercise all of the aspects of AeroS. I'm just like a kid in a candy store. I can hardly wait to get working on all of it. So I'm anxious to move this project off onto a group of people and get them going. And we have other activities lined up. And in the process of doing that, we intend to exercise those. I cannot tell you at this point beyond what we've done, because we have not had a chance to use things like team boards. We have not used assessments, etc. But we see the value, again, in getting rid of business writings. We have them all over the place like everybody. Process specifications are huge. In the aerospace business, you have process specifications that are 20 years older than I am, and some of them are really, really ugly. And there was conversation earlier about loading them, and I kind of laughed. There's no way on earth you're loading those things and making them usable. Some of the stuff is scattered over many sections and many paragraphs to come up with a logical answer. And so there is just an endless amount of opportunity in this space to standardize and make production knowledge available and delivered to the workflow.
Well, thank you, Darwin. And we got everything sorted here at the end. And then I posted the survey link, so we sure would appreciate it. And now this one should be clickable. Yes, it is. Fantastic. So this one is very easy to participate in. We appreciate your feedback as always. And just so you know, our next session will be back in the regular 10 to 5 platform, okay? And next up is our cool KPAC competition, and Josh is going to facilitate that. He's familiar with you, and we're excited. I'm excited to join in and watch. So your vote, of course, determines this year's winner and who will take home the trophy. So 10:55 is when that one starts. So click back in at 10 to 5 for the schedule. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks.